For this next talk, we have invited a guest that wears many hats. He's an entrepreneur, he's a blogger, he's a speaker, he's a designer. He has an extensive business experience that actually inspired me. He specializes in UX and user acquisition, and he's here to talk to us about design-driven development. So let's give a big hand to Vitaly Golomb.
Well, thanks for having me. I hope to fill your brain with some delicious design information and knowledge. Let's make sure this works. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk to you about today design-driven development. It's a term I coined, so I'll tell you a little bit about what it means. But first, a quote. Art is like masturbation. It is selfish and introverted and done for you and you alone. Design is like sex. There's someone else involved. Their needs are just as important as your own. And if everything goes right, both parties are happy in the end. So it's safe to say that design is not the same thing as art. So a little commercial, my background. Long story short, I've been involved with startups since the age of 13. My family moved from Ukraine to Silicon Valley. I got lucky when I was 8 years old. And I grew up in Cupertino, went to the same high school as Steve Jobs in Wozniak. Today, I split my time between generally two things. I run a venture-backed software as a service company called Keen. And what we're doing is we're trying to make it much easier for people to order anything printed and for hundreds of thousands of print companies around the world to do business with their customers. We're backed by 500 startups. As well as IDG Excel, a number of other funds, and we've amassed a few awards in the industry already. Now, the other thing I do, and let's see, it's a little warm in here, so give me a second. So the other thing I do is I spend a lot of time mentoring startups across Europe and the world. And you may know, putting on a little event in Kiev for about 3,000 people in less than 2 weeks. And this is our startup competition trophy, along with 25,000 euro investment from 500 startups and cross-border angels. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks. It's a short drive. We invite you to come. So I'll park this here. Now, with the commercial over, let's get moving. So you should know who this is. This is a very famous person in the design world. This is Dieter Rams. He's an industrial design guru. And even if you haven't heard of him, you've surely seen his work, and even very recently. He actually designed the iPod in 1958, along with some other Apple products, like the Braun radio, which was the Power Mac for about 10 years, as well as the iMac, as well as the other Power Mac, and even some of the applications. Now, the latest inspiration behind the Mac Pro is a New York City trash can. That's the closest I've been able to find so far. So Dieter Rams is famous for a lot of things. He's a design guru. He's still alive today. Back about 30 years ago, he came up with 10 design principles, 10 principles of good design. So before we go much further, I want to give you a taste and give you some taste about what is good design. Number one, very important, is that good design is innovative. It takes advantage of new technology. So in his words, the possibilities for innovations are not by any means exhausted. Technological development is always offering new opportunities for innovation and innovative design. But innovative design always develops in tandem with innovation. Innovative technology can never be an end in itself. So with every generation of new technology, we get newer and better and more convenient ways to solve problems that businesses and consumers have. So good design always takes advantage of the latest technology, which improves our lives. Number two, it makes a product more useful. Use dictates form, not the other way around. So a product is bought to be used. It has to satisfy certain criteria, not only functional, but also psychological and aesthetic. Good design emphasizes the usefulness of a product whilst disregarding anything that could possibly distract from it. So good design does not get in the way of the product or the use case. It could be a physical product, could be a piece of software. Good design is also aesthetic. Only well-executed objects can be beautiful. The aesthetic quality of a product is integral to its usefulness because products we use every day affect our personal and our well-being. But only well-executed objects can be beautiful. Right? Number 4, it makes a product more understandable. It makes a product talk. It clarifies the product's structure. Better still, it can make the product talk. At best, it is self-explanatory. And if you're an Apple user, and most people at startup conferences are these days, there's no manuals to an Apple product because it's designed to be self-explanatory. Good design is unobtrusive. It is neutral, open to self-expression. Just like good art, it belongs to the user. Products fulfilling a purpose are like tools. They are neither decorative objects nor works of art. Their design should therefore be both neutral and restrained to leave room for the user's self-expression. Number 6, good design is honest. It doesn't make promises that cannot be met. It does not make a product more innovative, powerful, or valuable than it really is. It does not attempt to manipulate the consumer with promises that cannot be kept. Number 7, good design is long-lasting. It avoids being fashionable and therefore never appears antiquated. Unlike fashionable design, it lasts many years, even in today's throwaway society. Now, he said today's throwaway society 30 years ago. And this design of this men's razor, that's been around for 50 or 60 years now. And it's largely remained the same. Good design is thorough. Nothing must be arbitrary or left to chance. Care and accuracy is the design process, shows respect towards the consumer. Right? Leaves nothing to chance, down to last detail. Go through all of your use cases. Make sure the product is useful for how the user will actually use it. Now, number 9, this is very timely today, even more than it was 30 years ago, is good design is environmentally friendly. It uses only what is needed. Design makes an important contribution to the preservation of the environment. It conserves resources and minimizes physical and visual pollution throughout the life cycle of the product. And finally, number 10, good design is as little design as possible. Simple and pure. Less but better because it concentrates on the essential aspects, and the products are not burdened with non-essentials. Back to purity, back to simplicity. So simple is good. Now, we've looked at some good design, we have some taste. Let's look at some bad design. This is usually pretty fun. So we'll start with architecture. So many of you may be familiar with the building in the upper left. This is in London, and it tends to melt cars with its reflection. That is an example of bad design. We have interesting shadows on the bridge here. Somebody didn't think about that, as well as some interesting other design where these staircases were kind of an afterthought. You kind of have to get in the building, right? That's kind of the point. Now, let's go inside a little bit, right? So a couple of things. Go ahead and figure out those elevator buttons. That's a little fun. The urinal for the gentleman in the room. That seems a little inconvenient, don't you think? How many of you have ever had problems with those sinks where you put your hands and you can't predict if it's going to turn on and off? Most annoying thing ever, as well as the hand dryers. Those things don't actually dry the hands. This particular coffee cup is actually very interesting. It's got a lot of design elements to it, and if you hold it just the right way, it will burn your thumb. And also, you can't stir inside. I don't know if you can see it on screen there, but it's got little ridges inside, so you can't stir your sugar. So bad design. So fashion is an often offender. Ladies, does this look comfortable, or does this look attractive even? I don't think so. Software, right? This is what every medical practice software looks like, right? It's designed by engineers for engineers. It's not designed for human consumption. Here's something that looks a little bit better, but is confusing as hell. Anybody know what this app is? No? This is a company called Color. Does that ring a bell? No? Still? So they raised about $41 million in their first round from Sequoia, famous founder. And where they really screwed up is they tried to really pioneer some new design concepts to the point where their users downloaded the app. They had a lot of press because of the big fundraise. Downloaded the app and had no idea what was going on. And this is the instruction screen. Does that tell you anything? Like, why is this one guy kneeling, taking a picture of the other guy's crotch? Like, don't get it. So try not to be a little too creative. Now, let's not leave the kids out of it, right? So kids' products can be interesting as well. And finally, signage. Signage, the way you present text, the way you present information is design. It's very important. So communicate clearly. And this is fun as well. How to piss off your designer friends and give them a migraine. As designers, we have obsessive compulsive disorder. So real quick, what do you think is the most important word on the screen right now? No, not quite. I'll give you a hint. There you go. Consistent. So consistency. Why is it important? Well, when you're consistent, you provide a perception of professionalism. And what that means is just clean and consistent design. It's a clean experience. Your user can trust you because they know what's happening next. And it sends a message of quality and builds trust, right? So I opened with a picture of a Porsche 911 on the main screen, and that's not an accident. This is a remarkable car design that's lasted for 50 years and 7 generations, right? But the design, if you can see from the left to right, the 7 generations, it's stayed largely within the same design envelope, right? So it's remarkable how they started with something so simple and such a recognizable shape, but underneath it's a completely different car, and it's been changed over the years with a different technology, innovated. So let's talk about perception a little bit. How important is perception? Now, there was a company a few years ago, Mint.com. Everybody heard of Mint.com? Yeah? So they had quite a design challenge. And their design challenge was that they needed to get their users to trust them with all of their banking logins. This is some of the most private information that people have, their financial information. So startup, no name, nobody knows about it, don't know if they can trust it. All of a sudden, they're asking for all of their bank logins. So it's quite a design challenge. And they had to create a sense of trust in their design. So everything that went in, the language, the colors, the user experience, the consistency of the user experience, everything was designed to build that trust. Now, when you look at selling things, Sephora is a store with cosmetics, right? And what is cosmetics? Well, cosmetics is just dirt, oil, wax, and fragrance, right? Sold for a lot of money, usually. Very heavy markup. So to create that packaging and that feel of luxury and all of that out of dirt, it's all design, right? So how much is design worth? If you look at different product categories, we can start with designer jeans. It's 100 to 350% markup, right? In some cases, a lot more for the actual cost of manufacturing, right? So one pair of jeans can cost $50, another can cost $700. They don't cost any more to make. It's all design. You're buying design. Furniture, 200 to 400% markup, sometimes a lot more. This is a Herman Miller chair. This is a 50-year-old design that's still sold today and very popular. Right? Talk about long-lasting design. I'm sure all of you recognize these shoes, right? Are these any better than any other shoes? They're probably more uncomfortable, right? But women spend a lot of money on these shoes because of that patented red color sole, right? Eyeglasses, 800 to 1,000% markup. And startup, great fast-growing startup in the US, Warby Parker, took advantage of that and said, hey, we don't need to make 800% markup. We'll have a huge business just doing 200% markup. And they sell glasses online instead of retail. Now, the biggest offender is name brand drugs, right? So when you buy Tylenol or Advil or any other brand that's in Europe, the same exact chemical, you're paying a lot more for that brand because you trust that brand. It's kind of important. You're putting it in your mouth or in your bloodstream. So you have to trust that brand. Now, design is not just what it looks like, design is how it works, said our friend Steve Jobs, who was a phenomenal editor of design. So let me show you a clip real quick, and I'll probably fast forward through it a bit, just for time. But you tell me if this is good design. So that was an example of really bad design, right? So what do users want? They don't want that. They want an easy button, right? This is a big marketing campaign for Staples in the US. They have the easy button. So let's talk about software more specifically, right? So your application consists of data, right? Consists of some kind of logic around the data and interface on top, or a wrapper. Now, how your users see it is basically an interface and some magic inside, right? So 99% of the world does not understand nor care about the magic of programming. So what do you think is most important? One of my favorite all-time quotes from Jeff Raskin, who's the actual creator of the Apple Macintosh project at Apple, as far as the customer is concerned, the interface is the product. Now, let's talk about the 5 design disciplines and how they interplay. I'm actually going to speed up a little so I can make it on time for you. So, first and foremost, when people come to me and say, I need a designer, we start drilling down, figuring out what is it that you need, really. So there are lots of different parts of design, lots of different disciplines, graphic design being one. So graphic design is responsible ultimately for branding. It consists of illustration, typography, image manipulation. That's graphic design. If you look at user experience, completely different thing as well. It's a bit of graphic design, a bit of psychology, knowledge of the medium, right? And it has to sense intent. You have to understand your user, your customer. It's really psychology type of discipline. The UI and visual design, like my t-shirt says UX, UI, it's usually put together. Well, UI is a subset of UX. These are not the same thing. These are not one thing. These are 2 separate things, right? It's a subset of UX and graphic design. The person that's executing the UI has to understand, obviously, the platform they're working on, right? The design principles for that given operating system or platform. And they have to surface functionality, right? So we now know what we want the user to do. We know what they want to do. We need to bring that together and make it easy. Front-end developer is also part of the design discipline, right? They have to have a design eye, but they have to be able to execute the user interface, right, technically. And they're the bridge to engineering. A lot of times, many times, you have a designer that obsesses and does pixel-perfect design, hands it off to engineering, they completely screw it up, it doesn't look like anything that they designed, it destroys the whole process. Right. You've had that problem before, right? Now, marketing is a part of design as well. It is the copy, the language in your design. It is the sales, it is ultimately the voice of the customer, right? So together, this is the design process. Sometimes in this sequence, sometimes a little bit different, but these are different disciplines. Another great quote. Good design is obvious, great design is transparent, right? Minimal design. It does not get in the way of what you're trying to do. So you've heard of user-centric design, without a doubt. What that means is that trying to design with the user in mind. Back in the day, there was no interface. This was a computer. You had a trained operator, just like a pilot, right? The cockpit is not necessarily user-friendly, it's powerful. Same thing before. But at some point, you had non-professional operators starting to use computers. Now you have to start paying more attention to what the interface is, what the software looks like, how it works. But one thing you have to keep in mind is that no successful product has ever come out of a focus group. Never, ever, ever. Apple, who's very successful with almost every single product, never tests their products with users, right, with focus groups. That's because users don't know what's possible, right? They don't know what's possible. So you have to observe them and design not for them, but with them in mind. What are they trying to do? And the proof, this is kind of not clear if Henry Ford actually said this, but it's a good quote nonetheless. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? Not a car. They don't understand. So there is a design success formula that was pioneered by Jared Spool. He has a team called User Interface Engineering. They do redesigns on big websites. And they basically said, you know, the formula, after a lot of research, is a combination of 4 factors. It's the vision, right? So the vision is we're out to solve a certain problem, right? And it's feedback from customers and users as quickly as possible. This is why you want to build an MVP, get it out there as quickly as possible so you can start collecting feedback, right? It's the culture within your team. Do you have a culture that is kind of relaxed, or do you have an obsessive culture that's perfectionist, that will do whatever it takes? Like, where are your priorities? And then obviously techniques, right? You want people that are trained and know what they're doing. So with that, you have 4 different paradigms of design. The first being unintentional design. Unintentional design is designed by engineers for engineers. Whether you had a design process or not, you still design something. There is something that people are interacting with. So if it's not on purpose, you have unintentional design. Here's a great example of that. Craigslist. If this site came out today, nobody would use it. But it came out, I don't know, 15 years ago now, and people only use it because it's a marketplace, and buyers and sellers find each other there. But category by category, Craigslist is being taken apart by different startups. Now, the next paradigm is self-design. Self-design is, I have this problem, I'm going to design a solution, I know it, I don't need to talk to anybody. Well, that works if 2 things are constant. 1, you use the product as it's intended, not for testing, but as it's intended every single day. And 2, you represent a big enough market that's interesting as a business, right? There's a lot of engineers that will build themselves a widget and then try to make a startup out of it. Doesn't work, usually. Genius design. Genius design is when you actually have enough experience in a particular category or particular industry that you know better than the customer what they need. And that's a great place to start. So when I look at startups, evaluations of investments, et cetera, I always look for a team that has specific experience in a particular industry that is more than the average person would have. They know the problem better than the average person. Right? It's a great place to start. But ultimately, you want to get to the activity-focused level. Activity-focused level means that you are pushing it out, you're testing it, you're getting feedback from customers, and you're making that loop as short as possible. Right? Even if you start at self-design or genius design, you ultimately want to get to activity-focused and test. You don't know everything, you can't assume everything. 9 times out of 10, you're going to be wrong. Right? So, brings me to my design-driven development process. So all that means, by this point, you probably should understand design goes first. So real quick, what does that mean? Define the problem. Who's the customer? What's the problem? You always start with that. You always end with that. If you don't know that, you're not ready to design anything. Right? Then in software, you can move on to wireframes and prototypes. And you can test and quickly iterate without having to invest in engineering time. Then you can put user interface layer, the visual layer, on top of what you already know needs to be designed, instead of going back and forth. You then know what you need to build. You can hand it off to the engineering team to start architecting a database, etc. Then you go to front-end development, application development itself, market it, get it out to your customers, get their feedback, and do that again and 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 again. Right? Design is intelligence made visible. It's Don Newgren, he's an artist, said this great quote. He has no social media footprint. I cannot give you his Twitter handle, therefore. So define the problem and let designers do their jobs. That's my advice to you. So how do you work with designers? Well, what do they need? Give you a hint, it's not more money. Right? Just like a good engineer is not going to be motivated by a little more money. They need basically three things. They need interesting problems. They need a creative environment. This is Google's office in Israel, by the way. And they need a seat at the table. They need to feel like they're part of the problem-solving process. They're answering the question. They're the problem solvers. Design is solving problems. How would you like your design? Pick two. Right? You can have it fast and cheap. It's going to be ugly, rushed, and careless. You can have it great and cheap. It will never be on time. Or you can have it fast and great, which is the sweet spot, but you get what you pay for. Right? It's not an area that you want to save money and cut corners. Get the right person on your team. Speaking of which, your startup consists of three particular parts. Of course, there's the business part, right? The numbers, the customers, the marketing, all of that. There's the engineering. You're building a product, right? And design is the third leg of the stool. So design is core. I'll leave you with that. Thank you for your attention. If you want the slides, thank you. So if you want the slides, follow me on Twitter, and I think we're out of time, so you can ask your questions on Twitter, and I'll respond on Twitter. How about
Okay,
that?
thank you, Vitaly. We still have 5 minutes of questions, so don't go anywhere.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Let's do some questions then.
We have a raised hand there.
In the spotlight. So usually this talk's a little longer, so I kind of rushed the end, but I think you got the point.
We definitely did.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Juana. I'm from Evangate, and I'm a UX designer, so I loved your talk.
Thanks.
You talked about how you do the whole iteration cycle in the end,
Yep.
and you included like UX design right in the beginning, which is amazing. But don't you think it should like be touched upon during the process also, when the developers get to it? Also, that the UX needs to be involved, and then further along.
Ideally, you hand off step by step. You hand off work, and you repeat the process many, many times, right? In a given week, in a given meeting, you can go through that process 5 times, and kind of hand off the baton. But you want to, it doesn't have to be the whole product that you've designed. It could be a small feature or a small design decision. As a designer, it's also your job to understand the engineering cost of every design decision, right? Is this something, am I asking the engineering to do something in 5 minutes or in 2 months, right? Things like that. So it's a process that you repeat a lot of times. But in a team, small or big, you're going to have multiple people touching different parts of it. It's very, very infrequent that you have one person that's going to cover everything and do it well. There are those people that can program and design well, but they're unicorns.
One more question here.
Thank you. I have let's say it like this. You are not an expert in the field, you think of a solution. You just have a hint that there's a certain public that will need a solution, that has a problem and that will need a solution. What is the first step you advise in this situation? So what do you start with?
Do your homework, right?
Which means?
Which means figure out how this problem is currently being solved. And you're going to come up with one of two answers. Either we have no competitors. It's a great product. Well, unfortunately, if you don't have any competitors, there's probably no market, right? It's a non-problem. It's in your mind. If you can convince somebody to understand it, it's a vision. If you can't, it's a hallucination, right? So the other is you're going to see a bunch of competitors, right? And you have to kind of look at different generations of technology and understand why they made those certain design decisions and when they made them, kind of what their context was. And for example, mobile is now starting to go to get really deep on B2B, because a generation ago, 10 years ago, the new technology was, let's put everything in the browser, right? From client-server applications, put in the browser, now everything's going mobile. So going mobile gives you a huge advantage over, and differentiator over something in the browser. So you have to do your homework, you have to look at the competitive landscape, understand how they're selling it, why. If the software for some reason looks dated, you have to understand, you can't assume that they're idiots and you're the smart one. You have to understand that, why they made those design decisions, what are the limitations, and kind of do as much homework as you can before you figure out, okay, we're going to do this, and you have to have a good reason to do it, right?
Thank you.
Cool. One last question. Well, it seems they're a bit shy, but I'm
Hi.
sure they're... Oh,
Yeah.
In the dark.
Of your first examples of design, it looked to me like a lot of them were really fashion when you presented what is the value of design, like the jeans.
Yep.
Maybe the value was from the fashion, not from the design being actually better. So the question would be, how and if do you think fashion applies to software, and whether it should, and whether somebody should strive for that?
Fashion specifically, or kind of design paradigms?
Like designing things to be fashionable.
Okay, so great example is right now Apple iOS 7 going to a flat design. Without too long of an answer, kind of skeuomorphic design had its time and place, because you need to train people that something on a flat screen is pushable. It's a button, so it emulated a physical button. People have been now trained sufficiently, Apple thinks, and has gone to flat design. And Apple is quite a trendsetter, so what that means, and I knew this when they announced it, I was kind of dreading it, because you have to just redesign everything, is that when Apple comes out with flat design, that means in a year and a half, anything that's not is going to look very, very old and dated. So there's definitely design trends and design fashions in different design language and tactics, so you have to kind of keep up with it, and it evolves over time. And it's usually because technology is evolving as well.
cool. Thank you. Thank you, Vitaly.
Thank you.